Deployments and Ops using Octopus Deploy with Colin Bowern.
The Azure DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company empowering .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results through its ClearMeasure Way methodology. And the architect forums that started just recently in the last few months, they are going strong. Signups are up for the next session. If you lead a software team and are looking to collaborate with peer architect leaders, if you don't have peers at your organization, then go ahead and sign up at the link in the show notes. And for those of you who are looking for my video podcast, Programming with Palermo, just go ahead and search in any of the podcast directories or on YouTube. You'll find it pretty easy. My guest today on the show is Colin Bowern, and he is the Senior Vice President of Product at Octopus Deploy. And as a technical product leader, his career has spanned music and health and financial and technology industries with companies like Microsoft, Johnson Controls, Brink, Orion Health, and Official Community. He is passionate about growing product people through his work with the Product Aotearoa, and that's, by the way, in New Zealand. And you can learn more about him at colinbowern.com. And we'll also include links to his various properties in the show notes. Colin, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Excellent. Thanks, Jeffrey. It's great to be here in a sunny New Zealand summer.
Fantastic. Yeah, summer, and I'm in Texas, and we kind of cool down a little bit and put on a hoodie. And then in the afternoon, it's short sleeves again.
Yep, nice. That's why I moved here from Canada. It was after several decades of snow. It was time for a bit of a change here. So we got a nice moderate climate here.
That's right.
Snow is a very rare thing in Auckland.
Yes. And you and I met in Canada at one of those Dev Teach conferences way back. So yeah, you were living there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I got involved, ex-Microsofty, but then post got involved in helping out the community, really passionate about kind of just sharing all the different things we learn. Because as you know, in technology, there's never a perfect choice. There's lots of pros and cons. And so I found, Dev Teach and even just the whole Microsoft MVP program is just an opportunity to get out and share what we learned. A lot of what you do as well. And yeah, I think that's really valuable for us as technologists to learn from others and learn what worked and why it worked in that situation and how it might apply to us.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm looking forward to getting the scoop from you on the latest on deployments and ops and DevOps and Octopus Deploy. But for those of listeners who haven't heard you speak at any of the conferences or followed you, let's back up for a little bit and just share kind of about your background and how you have progressed in software and maybe some key points that have led to you basically running the product group at Octopus Deploy.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, a quick highlight of my career, but started like everybody or a lot of folks where kind of just it was this hobby in high school, and found the local network class and got to know Novell NetWare back in the day and whatnot. And it's actually started out network infrastructure as a result of just kind of helping out around high school. Kind of post high school, got into what was then, I guess, the late 90s startup scene, attempting to do a startup, kind of working some corporate gigs as a network engineer, but really passionate to try and get into all the opportunities that technology has to offer. So never really limited myself to kind of one particular industry. And I think that's what led me into Microsoft at the time to join consulting services, because you had this opportunity to do early adopter projects across a range of different industries, and spent a lot of time in financial services then. But there's this cool new tech emerging called .NET, So I was fortunate to be there for the launch of that, and help introduce that to a number of kind of organizations in Canada through the work with Microsoft. Following that, had this opportunity to do music and tech at Official Community, join a startup, and help artists kind of get back into owning and connecting with their fan base. So managed to build that up into a sustainable business, and that's off and running today with the original founder of the business. From there, back into consulting, and then an opportunity came to move to New Zealand when my partner was applying to med school. We had honeymooned here and jokingly said, I should apply to New Zealand. We know we like it there, and she got in. And so we made the bet to kind of come check out the world on this side a little further beyond the honeymoon, and got involved with a number of local technology companies here, Orion Health, who's actually got a big US presence in terms of Rhapsody, their integration engine for healthcare data. But came back across this cool product called Octopus Deploy that I remember seeing back in the early 2010s, and just kind of checking in with where they're at. And they happened to be starting this kind of growth journey as they wanted to move from a really great product that developers love to automate their release and operations automation. And we really wanted to be able to say, well, how do we take this and actually scale it out to set the standard for the organization? This is the tool we will use as the organization. And so that's been the journey for the last year and a half since I've joined, is building our way up to setting that standard for how enterprise software teams release and operate software. And really, happy with our progress. Always more to do. We're in this era in particular of moving from servers to containers as a very dominant trend, and of course some serverless happening out there. But people are actually revisiting, how do I deploy? And the whole point of manually deploying to a server, it just doesn't kind of feel viable any further as we move into containers and serverless. And so there's this really kind of exciting moment of people wanting to figure out, how do I automate all of this? How do I have that go button? How do I have that repeatable process so I get back to doing the things that really require that problem solving skill, which is building the apps in front of me. So yeah, join them as heading up product management, and then taking over engineering and design. As Paul, the founder, wanted to focus on growing the broader business side of it. It's been an exciting journey. We've got about 100 folks in R&D, product managers, UX designers, engineers, lots of ex-customer folks who've joined us along the way as well to kind of put that passion back into the product. And lots to do.
Well, awesome. Well, I want to get into your brain about how you think about deployments and operations, and the more towards the ops side, running things in production. But I want to make sure that we plug Octopus Deploy. I casually describe it to people as when you outgrow the easy quick starts, because all the AWS and Azure and everything else, they have solutions where you could just point something to a Git repository and boom, you have a website online, and boom, you're deployed, and it's super easy. But then you get to a point where things are real, and when you need an actual sophisticated solution, that's when you pick up Octopus Deploy. When you outgrow the easy stuff, that's kind of the layman's way that I describe it. But you're deep into it. How do you pitch the value proposition for Octopus Deploy?
Absolutely. Look, I think you're onto something there. I mean, the way I describe it is, we don't need to be there for the hello world deployment. When things are really simple, you've got a single target, a single environment. You don't need a tool like Octopus, much like any sort of kind of professional grade tools. When you got something that's really simple. But when you look at the enterprise and all the different things that you need to do, you need to be able to audit what's happening. You need to be able to show state of where's my app in each of the different environments, what version is out there. Is there a change management ticket associated with it? Can I show that steps were followed consistently between environments. These are all things that those sorts of kind of stack specific tools tend to fall short on. They're really focused on just get me to live. Don't kind of model the rest of the processes and the information around deployment. And so that's really where Octopus steps in. Is when you now start to think about, I've got dev, test, QA, okay, and now I've got to deploy to all those environments, and I got to do it in a way where, as I move from environment to environment, there's consistency in the process, so that I know that what I tested in QA is going to be the same process I execute in production, with the exception of maybe some configuration variables that are different. That's what Octopus provides. When you want anybody on the team to be able to hit the go button, hit the deploy button, without having to worry about, do I have all the right tools on my laptop? Do I have the right access, et cetera? That's where Octopus steps in.
Mm-hmm.
When you really want to be able to show that not only are we doing and following the process, but we've got our association with change management tickets from ServiceNow or Jira Service Management, and I couldn't go ahead without those. Again, that's that sort of kind of governance assurance that Octopus provides. So when things kind of get enterprise real and all the different things you deal with in the enterprise, that's where Octopus tries to step in, but does it in a way that, we've always built the product starting from the users. This isn't built for the CIO. It's built for the DevOps engineer, the software teams that are doing this every day. And so we make sure it actually does what it says on the tin. And so that's really our kind of philosophy of build really great product and then figure out how to expand it into the rest of the enterprise. And it's really important to us that we don't it's really important to us that we deliver great products that users love, and certainly our feedback's been telling us that. And of course, always more to do. Lots of ambition as we see this, as I mentioned earlier, this move from machines to containers to serverless happening. Lots of opportunity to apply lessons learned and approach things with a new sense of scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when the product started, I remember it was Octopus Deploy. It was made deploying really easy. Deploying to VMs, hosted VMs were all over the place. The serverless cloud was kind of really just kind of getting out there. But now there's so much more than deploy. What's your view on after the deploy? And what are all the things that you've seen across all the customers that everybody has, and how have you categorized those, all the different after deploy activities?
Yeah. So deploy isn't necessarily even just putting the zip file on the server and unpacking it and hitting restart on the web service. People do verification checks as they're doing deployments to consider that deploy is good and done. But people also kind of go into operations mode because rarely does an app kind of get deployed and then you just leave it alone. Certificates need to be renewed. You may have processes that need to be kicked off within your application depending on things happening. And so we've also kind of paid attention to this, and without creating a kind of a massively complex ITIL focused kind of operations management tool that's trying to manage an entire data center, we focus on application operations. And so we've introduced Runbooks into the mix as well, recognizing there's a bunch of kind of regular processes building on all the information we already know, environments, variables, et cetera, to be able to help you manage all of those post-deployment steps that you need to do. And again, it's with the same philosophy of anybody in the team. It doesn't matter if it's 3 a.m, you're the junior engineer on call. You've never done this, but the Runbook says to run this step, you can hit that run and kind of have that confidence that it's going to do exactly what it says. There's no typos, no missing parameters, etc. That was a kind of an extension for us as to kind of this happens all the time. Let's extend into that, and that came out of talking to real customers, doing real stuff every day, watching what they do, learning from what they're doing, and spotting opportunity to make that a little bit more delightful. We talk a lot about happy deployments. That's kind of one of our main themes that we talk about. It's that idea of kind of It used to be that you'd have to organize everybody for a Sunday 3 a.m. deployment, and very stressful. You're tired, you got the coffee, you're probably on your third cup of coffee, trying to remember, did I hit the right thing in the right order? We want it to be a delightful time where you can deploy anytime. We actually had a customer who'd accidentally deployed midweek. And they was like, oh my God, we deploy. And then they actually realized, oh, actually, it's no big deal, because everything just worked. Because they'd been doing it, they'd automate those weekend deployments, and it had been going so well that kind of midweek deployment actually ended up being no big deal. And then we've got other customers like, one here in New Zealand, Aurora, who does crime prevention software, mostly kind of serverless technology built on Azure. But they deploy up to 18 times a day, using Octopus. So there's our job is to get, so deployment is a happy time. This is when all of my hard work is going into the hands of users, and I'm going to see the payoff. It shouldn't be a stressful time.
Yeah,
that's what we're trying to kind of models. How do we get you from stressful to happy deployments?
You mentioned certificates, and there's a lot of teams that literally put these expiration date on some type of calendar, or maybe schedule a ticket in the overall department's ticketing system. There could be any number of applications and environments and whatnot. But I was just thinking, okay, that type of thing in the system that's responsible for making changes to that application, that's putting the schedule as close as possible to the environment that it affects, as opposed to somewhere else.
Absolutely. Look, and one step further, don't just put a reminder to do it. Put a scheduled trigger on that says, on the 28th of this day or every 30 days, go renew the certificate. So again, that operations automation, can not just there to help you push the button, it's actually there to also schedule it for you. And again, you don't have to manage your access to your critical systems in a different app. All those variables are shared, those secrets are managed in the same place that you trust for deployments. So yeah.
I like,
of course, auditing to go along with that.
Right.
So you know what happened when and who did it. So
this concept, regardless of how the product is implemented, this concept kind of challenges everyone and says, yeah, you could put a reminder anywhere, and sure, we've been manually doing this or that or another thing for a long time, but wait a minute. Did you know that this could be a command line? And if it could be a command line, you could just, automate it away, and now you never have to do it manually again.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
Absolutely. And so much, like I said, so much easier to do it where you've kind of got all the same access and the communication barrier line set up to all the different environments. I'd rather do that than string together, here's my ticket in Jira that says, please do this task, that then triggers a Zapier workflow, that then triggers the amount of, opportunity for failure there, which ultimately results in downtime is pretty high because I've connected through a bunch of systems. Whereas having a deployment tool, just run those automation tasks can give you that oversight. And again, you don't have to build then into your app any sort of kind of self-operational capability, which, hey, when you're Netflix scale, you probably can. Mm-hmm. But when you're a state bank and, you're a team of 5 and you got a lot of work to do, you want as much kind of automation help as you can so that you can kind of get back to the moments that matter for your business.
Well, across everything that people are using Runbooks for, are there any themes or categories that have kind of emerged where you can say, you know what? Yeah, every team should do these 5 Runbooks, these 10 Runbooks, because they're just so universally applicable.
Yeah, look, there's definitely a lot of folks sharing on our community, but I can, I guess there's a couple of themes. If you kind of put your mind into the pre-production and then the production stage. In pre-production, the runbooks I love seeing are things like, the database reset scripts and the sample data population tasks and whatnot. The DBA, if you've worked in a mid to large size organization, you typically have these DBAs who want to make sure that the database is handled properly, because they understand all the isms of the particular database engine. But giving out the SA account so you can reset databases is a pretty scary thing. So kind of having an ops runbook that says, okay, clear the database, kind of that's so much better than kind of that risk of, here to a QA engineer is all this great, power and responsibility. And the QA is like, I just want to get my job done. I just want to, hit the reset button and test my app. You can go into the runbook and set up those kind of reset or refresh opportunities. So we see a lot of that inside Runbooks, is that idea of in pre-production, what are the things that I need to do to get my UAT testers, which may not be technologists. Some of them are, BAs or kind of folks that are on loan from the business who don't understand SQL, don't want to kind of figure out which SQL script on which USB drive is the right one. They just want to do the thing. So we see that theme. In the production side, definitely, kind of the certificate renewal is kind of a big deal. But you'll also see kind of some cleanup operations like clearing out and compacting databases and things like that. You'll see things like load balancer draining, like if I've still got kind of a more server-based architecture and I need to take out a particular node for some maintenance, it's like transition the traffic off this node so I can take that out. A whole variety of scenarios on the production side of things.
Okay. In the mindset, so much has happened in the DevOps space since 2010, when the word started being used. I wanted to ask you what you've seen about the term DevOps engineer and where it comes from, because before DevOps, you definitely had a divide. And I mean, Microsoft still organizes its conferences around, quote, IT professional and, quote, developer. And so has the IT pro become the new DevOps engineer? Has it just renamed, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, it's like all things in IT, there's almost like a cycle, like where the cloud in some ways is shades of the mainframe with, time slicing and scheduling and things like that. Yeah, look, I think there is, to a degree, IT professionals are morphing into DevOps engineers, because if you look at all the skills of things you need to know as a DevOps engineer, networking, security, kind of application setup, possibly, depending on the size of your organization, you got to know the database. There's actually a lot of skills there that are kind of above and beyond that. How do I implement a really great user experience, with code, with HTML, JavaScript, whatever the UI choice is. And a lot of those skills definitely have roots back in the IT professional side of things. I think kind of what DevOps attempted to do, the whole movement, was actually kind of bring together kind of that communication between what was traditionally developers and operations, where developers would compile the code, throw it over the fence. I don't think about logging. I don't think about security. I don't think about, kind of the overall capacity demands of my application. It's trying to bring those together, which I think is absolutely right, because it helps us as developers write better applications, more operable applications, if we appreciate that. So to me, it was kind of like Agile. It's not, here's a book, just do these 5 things and suddenly you're DevOps. It's a mindset that has really trying to bring together, how do we get a better, kind of more trustworthy application outcome for our businesses? Because developers on their own are really focused on building a really great experience. IT professionals are about stability, but overall, they result in a better overall application experience for your business. And that's really what DevOps is trying to do, is bring everybody back to the thing that we all are here for, which is, when I get up in the morning and I open up my banking app, it works.
Mm-hmm.
When I have to, get a purchase order through the system, it works, and everything just works because we're as we all know, technology is part of every facet of our life now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's another concept that it's a number of years old now. A lot of people have talked about it, infrastructure as code. But it doesn't seem like the dust has settled on how really to handle that. And especially in the cloud. Okay, yeah, we can spin up resources. How do you think about infrastructure as code, and where does it live? If you're going to create something in Azure automatically, does the deployment process look to see if it exists and then create it? Or do you like to see a runbook create said environments and then a deployment operate on the environments? Or how do you organize that concept of infrastructure as code in your head and with the product?
Yeah, look, I think it's one of those scenarios where I could use the consultant's answer. It depends on kind of where your team's maturity is at. We've definitely seen people who execute infrastructure as code in a runbook. So, kind of get the environment all set up and then deploy my app into it. And then there's other people that have packaged the concept of environment and resources and app as one whole concept. Just make this thing alive. And they treat environments more ephemeral in that sense. And it might be a case of, for example, kind of tenancy and the idea that, I'm going to go into my SaaS app and I'm going to sign up as a new client, request a trial, and suddenly a whole new environment appears with my app running. I kind of treat that as one big atomic unit. So I think it's one of those. There isn't a perfect answer yet. We're still figuring it out. The wider piece around infrastructure as code, though, is I think there's still a lot more work to do to make it more accessible to the everyday developer. That's probably the bigger challenge still. Is it's very much you're stuck inside text files with whether it's YAML or JSON or whatever, or kind of whatever language you want to use. You're inside these text files modeling out this infrastructure, and it gets really complex really quickly. And if you're relying on your developers to do that alone, there's a lot of areas where they can hurt themselves, whether it's kind of firewall rules or network subnets or et cetera. And likewise, infrastructure folks kind of, do I store that beside the source code in Git? Or do I create another repository because I need to control that separately? I don't think we've kind of, it hasn't been like this is now the way you do the things, has emerged as a universal standard. So we've tried to stay a little bit flexible on that sense. There isn't we don't have a strong opinion about which way to go on that, and I think kind of we'll see as kind of it becomes as cloud drives us, and this has been the thing that I think has been accelerating this mostly, is the fact that in cloud infrastructure at all layers is largely kind of on-demand provision via APIs, like infrastructure as code. And so, we're building more of kind of here are some clear patterns for it. I do think in the end, you'll get to application code, infrastructure as code, and policy as code will be the third leg. And it will be those three things that define your app. And, infrastructure as code and policy as code acting more as that kind of manifest description of here's how I instantiate the app. And I think containers in particular is the piece that's going to accelerate more and more of that, because it used to be with machines, you deployed multiple apps to the machine, so you had to provision the infrastructure first because you didn't know which app was first. I had an IIS server, a SQL server. I would deploy multiple apps to my IIS server, multiple databases to my SQL server. So infrastructure had to come first. With containers, we're shrinking down and packaging up the complete runtime element of the thing. And so kind of the idea of infrastructure kind of and the app going out at the same time, starts to make a lot more sense. And so again, that's going to drive, I guess, a bit more of an advancement in infrastructure as code, as opposed to that kind of previous era where infrastructure was the shared concept that had to be there first before the app.
I think a lot of listeners are relieved to hear you say this. You're leading an industry leader organization around this, and you're saying the dust is not settled yet. And they're thinking, okay, so I just haven't missed the boat, and I don't. So I think a lot of listeners are encouraged there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, and hey, if like all these things, like anything in automation, my advice is always just start small. Don't try and solve automation end to end. Start with the non-production flows, the things you do every day, and kind of build your confidence that the automation works. Now try and bring that from the dev environment to the UAT environment, and then go to conquer production. But kind of start small, build up. Likewise with infrastructure as code, don't try and define every piece of infrastructure and model your whole environment. You're not trying to solve disaster recovery and business continuity and application deployment all in one step. Start small and kind of build from there.
Okay. You talked about containers a lot, and just noticing that none of the major vendors, Microsoft included, are really clamoring to mainstream Windows Server containers that they exist and some people are using them, but really containers are all about the Linux base operating system. And so maybe just the question is, in your view, for running things in production, is the future a Linux runtime future with all the containers? Are we for the .NET developer, are we as an industry leaving Windows Server and Windows Server base operating systems behind? And in this new world with containers, is it just it's Linux under the covers? That's just the way it's going to be. What's your view?
Yeah. Look, I think Microsoft way back started to try and shrink the operating system. You remember Windows Embedded? That was the ability to kind of componentize and shrink the footprint of Windows. And we got kind of Windows Server Core and all of these permutations that tried to shrink it. And Windows containers was, kind of the next kind of evolution of trying to shrink the operating system, because Linux offered that advantage of in a very small package with a very minimal resource footprint, I can kind of bootstrap and get all the basic operating system functionality.
Yeah.
And at this stage, kind of Microsoft's kind of got to make a really compelling case, I think, to really invest in that a little bit further, because it feels like they've kind of there's a V1, but you're always sitting there wondering, is there a V2 or a V3? That they haven't kind of built that confidence. Whereas kind of the world of Linux, and it's remember, it's also not just Linux, the distribution. People have gone and created distributions specifically for containers, so highly optimized for that sort of format. There's been a lot more visible movement. And so if you're making an architectural bet and saying, okay, I'm going to start my containers journey, where is my confidence that there's a long-term future in there? And I think for a lot of folks, we're certainly seeing this across our customer base, kind of Linux containers is pretty much becoming the default. So what does that mean if you're writing something that's contained inside a Windows service that runs on Windows? Well, with .NET Core, you've got a lot more options, of course, around hosting environment. You may start to decouple some of that concept of my application logic from the Windows service piece. So you've got that flexibility. So at this stage, I would say it's highly likely that we will continue to see Linux containers dominate at this stage. And with Microsoft kind of hedging their bets with SQL Server running on Linux in a container, for example, there's a bit of a signal there that Microsoft's also recognizing they can't be blind to this. But I think that's also where I think Microsoft, from working with them back in the early 2000s when we tried to rule the data center and let's push out the mainframes and everything else like that, we start to recognize that actually there's shades of gray here, and it can't be a all Microsoft or nothing environment. And certainly the Microsoft of today is much more multi-platform friendly. I think, but again, back to the developers, putting C# on Linux, that's still that is still the important part, is that all my skills that I've built up, it's not like I have to start from scratch. I get to continue building on those skills. It's just I've got a slightly different underlying OS runtime with some characteristics I need to get to learn and know. Yeah.
They haven't branded it this way, but I think I see Azure as the new server operating system. It's not at the server level as we think of it, but it's the data center operating system. And with them,
exactly.
I think military and remote solutions are adopting it first, but the Azure stack and the new stuff that's coming out, and they're still changing the branding on it. Basically, a mini rack totally on your own of a little bit of Azure.
Yep.
It's not cheap.
The key services everybody uses, you can kind of get the on-premise with the cloud style experience. Which is, if I look back to the banks in the early 2000s, this is what they were all trying to build. There's a lot of kind of like private cloud with HP and all this stuff, but it was always kind of a couple of steps behind, what we were seeing emerge in the public cloud. And so now if I can kind of get that public cloud experience in an on-premise or a high control environment for those that need it, boy, that's the best of both worlds. But back to your question, I think in the container world, we're at this point kind of expecting Linux to remain the dominant for the foreseeable future.
And it's great with .NET Core and 5, 6, and 7. I mean, the experience of running .NET 7 in Linux, it's like a non-issue. The only thing I've encountered is in the PowerShell scripts of the builds, I had the habit of using some command line tools, like, that command line tool had a Windows dependency, and maybe you have to whittle out some of those. But as far as just the application, Microsoft's done a great job.
Yeah, and even PowerShell multi-platform as well. It's no longer Windows PowerShell. It is just PowerShell that can go across. And I know that the folks that built PowerShell, that was one of the early kind of like, how do we get this into multi-platform? Mm-hmm. How do we build an alternative to Bash and other scripting languages out there with a slightly new paradigm? So it's great to see that also kind of making the leap with .NET Core to being multi-platform.
Yeah. As we kind of are at the time here, just as we close, for people who maybe haven't gone deep in Octopus Deploy or whatnot, what's the easiest way to get started and just kind of make the plug if someone just wants to get something working?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, octopus.com, start a trial on our cloud, get a cloud instance up and running. We've got a whole bunch of tutorials on how to help you make your first deployment, regardless of tech stack. So if you check out our docs there, we're doing in particular some work. If you're experimenting with GitHub Actions, we're seeing a big emergence of that. We've got some actions now in the marketplace there as well as of the last couple of months to help you connect your CI process into your deployment process. But also, I'd also plug, if you're still trying to explain DevOps to your team and what it's all about, or you've got a senior stakeholder that's wondering, like, why are we spending our time in this? Octopus.com/DevOps. We've tried to write this kind of plain English, kind of not trying to sell you anything. Kind of here's all the different concepts around DevOps. Here's how you measure the success of your overall DevOps investments. Here's what delivery is all about, from a principal perspective. Here are the types of tools you might be thinking about. All of that's there at octopus.com/DevOps. So I'd encourage, for folks that are early on in their journey, that's a great as well starting read, just to get your head wrapped around the principles and concepts before you kind of get too heavy into the tools and how do I make these choices of which way to structure my projects.
Awesome. Well, Colin, thanks so much for coming on the Azure DevOps podcast and sharing with us all about deployments and ops. We appreciate your expertise.
No worries. Thanks, Jeffrey. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.